The crystal halls of Velenthor Prime stretched endlessly before the gathered delegates, their walls glowing with soft blue light that pulsed like a living heartbeat. This was the heart of the Valari Dominion, a civilization that had ruled the stars for 10,000 years before humans had even discovered fire. Princess Selra Velatris walked through the grand corridor with her head held high, her bioluminescent skin casting gentle patterns of violet and gold across the polished floor. She was the third daughter of Emperor Velatris himself, and she carried his authority like a crown upon her elegant head. The Valari were a magnificent species, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with slender bodies that moved like water flowing through air. Their skin shifted colors with their emotions, and their eyes, large and luminous, could see spectrums of light that other species could only imagine. They were ancient, they were powerful, and they knew it with every fiber of their being. Today, the Galactic Coalition had called an emergency summit, and representatives from 12 different species had gathered in these sacred halls. The reason was simple and terrifying. The Kethvari horde had begun moving toward the Outer Rim territories, and their swarm threatened to consume everything in its path. Selira took her place at the head of the Valari delegation, her attendants arranging themselves behind her, like stars orbiting a sun. She surveyed the room with barely concealed distaste, as she observed the various alien species that had come to beg for Valari assistance. The Torvani were there with their 4 arms and rough gray skin. The Mythali floated in their atmospheric suits, their gaseous forms swirling with anxiety. The Kroloth delegation sat in reinforced chairs designed to hold their massive bulk. But it was the empty seats that caught her attention. The human delegation had not yet arrived. "Typical," she murmured to her chief attendant, a young male named Velen, who stood at her shoulder. The youngest species in the coalition cannot even manage to arrive on time for a summit that may determine the fate of the galaxy. Velen nodded in agreement, his skin flickering with amusement. "Perhaps they got lost, Your Highness. I hear their navigation systems are quite primitive compared to ours." Selira allowed herself a small smile at the joke. Humans were such strange creatures, short, fragile, with dull skin that never changed color, and eyes that could barely see in dim light. They had stumbled into space only 200 years ago, and yet they acted as though they belonged among the elder races. It was almost amusing how seriously they took themselves. The summit began without the humans, and the grand speaker, an ancient Valari male whose skin had faded to pale silver with age, outlined the threat they faced. The Kethvari were breeding faster than anyone had predicted, and their horde now numbered in the billions. If they were not stopped, they would sweep across the Outer Rim within a year. Arguments erupted almost immediately. The Torvani demanded more ships for their border defenses. The Mythali insisted on diplomatic solutions that everyone knew would fail. The Kroloth wanted to launch an immediate assault, but lacked the fleet strength to do so alone. And through it all, Selira sat in silence, watching and judging. The Valari would lead any joint fleet, of course. That was simply natural. They had the largest navy, the most advanced technology, and the tactical brilliance born of 10 millennia of warfare. The other species would follow, or they would fall. It was nearly an hour into the summit, when the doors finally opened and the human delegation arrived. Selira turned to look, curious despite herself about what excuse they would offer for their tardiness. Ambassador Chen entered first, a small human female, with dark hair streaked with gray and a face lined with worry. She walked with the aid of a cane, and Selira noticed that her left arm was wrapped in medical bandages. Behind her came a single figure in armor. The soldier was encased in standard Terran battle gear, dull gray plates that covered every inch of his body, scarred and dented from obvious combat. His helmet obscured his face completely, and he moved with the heavy steps of someone carrying great weight. He was perhaps 6 feet tall, barely reaching Selira's shoulder, and he looked utterly unremarkable. "My apologies for our delay," Ambassador Chen said, bowing to the Grand Speaker. We encountered Kethvari scouts at the border. Our escort fleet was attacked, and we barely escaped. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Kethvari scouts this deep in coalition territory was troubling news indeed. The Grand Speaker gestured for the humans to take their seats, and Ambassador Chen limped to the human section, with her armored guard following silently behind. The soldier took up position behind her chair, standing at perfect attention, like a statue made of metal and silence. Solara leaned toward Velen and spoke in Valari, confident that the humans could not understand their ancient tongue. They send us a wounded diplomat and a single armored grunt. Do they think this is a war council or a charity function? Velen's skin rippled with amusement, and several other Valari attendants nearby flickered in quiet laughter. The soldier did not move, did not react, simply stood there like a piece of furniture. The summit continued, and eventually the discussion turned to strategy. A Torvani general proposed a defensive line along the Kelax corridor, while a Mathali diplomat suggested negotiating with the Horde's leadership, as if the Kethvari had any interest in negotiation. Then Ambassador Chen raised her hand to speak, and the Grand Speaker acknowledged her with obvious reluctance. The Terran delegation proposes a preemptive strike, she said, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. Our intelligence suggests that the Horde's primary breeding moon is vulnerable. If we strike now, we can cripple their reproduction capacity for a generation. Salira could not contain herself. She rose from her seat, her skin flashing with irritation. You propose that we risk our fleets on a desperate assault based on human intelligence? She asked, letting scorn drip from every word. This is the desperate flailing of a species that learned starflight only 2 centuries ago. Perhaps the humans should leave strategy to those who have actually mastered the art of war. The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Chen's face remained calm, but Salira could see the tightening around her eyes. The armored soldier behind her did not move a single inch, did not even turn his helmet toward the princess, who had just insulted his entire species. With respect, Your Highness, Ambassador Chen replied, humanity has fought the Kethvari before. We know their weaknesses. And yet you arrive late, wounded, with a single guard, Salira shot back. Forgive me if I am not impressed by human expertise. The summit dissolved into further arguments after that, with no resolution reached. Delegates retired to their quarters as night fell over Valanthor Prime, and Salera returned to her chambers, feeling satisfied that she had put the humans in their place. She was preparing for sleep when the alarms began to scream, a sound that had not echoed through these halls in 3,000 years. The palace was under attack, and somewhere in the crystal corridors, death had come wearing chitin and carrying blades. Blood in the crystal halls. The screaming started in the eastern wing and spread like fire through dry grass. Salira threw open her chamber doors to find chaos flooding the corridors. Servants running in terror, guards shouting orders that no one followed, and beneath it all, a clicking sound that made her blood freeze in her veins. Kethvari, the nightmare species, had sent assassins into the heart of Valari civilization. She grabbed a ceremonial blade from her wall, a weapon she had trained with since childhood, and stepped into the madness. Her royal guards found her within moments, 6 warriors in gleaming armor who formed a protective circle around their princess. We must reach the secure bunker, Your Highness, the guard captain shouted over the noise. The assassins are targeting the delegates. They moved through the corridors as quickly as they dared, but the palace had become a maze of death. Twice, they encountered bodies, a Torvani diplomat torn apart, a Mathali delegate whose atmospheric suit had been punctured, weaving nothing but dissipating gas. The Kethvari had sent Shadeclaws, Salira realized with growing horror. These were not ordinary warriors, but elite assassins bred specifically for infiltration and murder. Their chitin was darker than normal, almost black, and they could move through shadows like ghosts. At an intersection of two corridors, everything went wrong. Shade claws dropped from the ceiling where they had been hiding, and suddenly her guards were fighting for their lives. Celira pressed her back against the wall and watched in horror as her protectors fell one by one. The Valari guards were skilled, trained in the ancient art of Vethkai, but the Shade Claws were faster and utterly without mercy. Chitin blades sliced through ceremonial armor as if it were paper, and bioluminescent blood painted the crystal walls in streaks of glowing blue. "Run, Your Highness!" the guard captain screamed as a blade pierced his chest. "Run!" Celira ran. She had never run from anything in her life, but now she fled through the halls of her ancestors, with death clicking and hissing behind her. Her bare feet slapped against the cold floor, and her hearts pounded so hard she thought they might burst. She turned a corner and found her path blocked. Two Shade Claws stood before her, their compound eyes reflecting her terrified face 1,000 times over. They were 7 feet of armored nightmare, their blade arms raised and dripping with the blood of her people. Celira raised her ceremonial blade, knowing it was useless, knowing she was about to die. She thought of her father, her sisters, the 10,000 years of Valari history that would end with her in this corridor. She prepared to fight, to die with whatever dignity she could manage. And then a blur of gray metal slammed into the first Shadeclaw with the force of a crashing starship. The human soldier, the armored grunt she had mocked mere hours ago, hit the assassin so hard that they both crashed into the wall with a crack of shattering chitin. She barely saw him move before he was on top of the creature, his fists raining down in brutal strikes that had nothing to do with grace or elegance. The second Shadeclaw lunged at him, and he rolled away from the first, coming up with a knife that seemed to appear from nowhere. His movements were ugly, desperate, completely lacking the flowing beauty of Valari combat, but they were effective. He blocked a blade arm with his armored forearm, sparks flying as chitin scraped across metal, and drove his knife up into the joint where the Shadeclaw's head met its thorax. The creature shrieked and collapsed, twitching. The first assassin had recovered and leaped at his back. Celira screamed a warning, but the human was already moving, spinning aside so the blade arm that should have pierced his spine merely carved a deep gouge across his chest plate instead. He grabbed the Shadeclaw's arm and twisted with his whole body. There was a horrible cracking sound, and the creature's limb bent in a direction it was never meant to go. Before it could recover, he had crushed its throat with 3 savage punches. Silence fell, broken only by the distant sounds of fighting and the heavy breathing coming through the soldier's helmet speakers. He stood among the bodies of the assassins, his armor sparking and smoking from damage, and turned to face her. "Your Highness," he said, his voice surprisingly calm through the helmet speaker. "We need to move. There are more of them." Celira found she could not speak. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. This human, this creature she had dismissed as primitive and worthless, had just killed 2 elite Shadeclaw assassins with nothing but his fists and a knife. He did not wait for her to find her voice. He simply gestured for her to follow and began moving down the corridor. After a moment of stunned hesitation, she did. They encountered 3 more assassins on their way to the secure bunker. Each time, the human engaged without hesitation, throwing himself into combat with a ferocity that made Celira's stomach turn. He fought like an animal, using every dirty trick imaginable, throwing debris in their eyes, using the environment as a weapon, even headbutting one creature hard enough to crack his own helmet. And each time, she noticed something else. He was hurt, badly hurt. She could see the way he favored his left leg, the way his movements grew slightly slower after each fight. His armor was damaged in a dozen places, and she caught glimpses of red blood, human blood, seeping through the cracks. But he did not stop, did not slow down, did not even acknowledge his injuries. They found other survivors along the way, Ambassador Chen nursing her wounded arm, a Kroloth delegate who had crushed a Shadeclaw with her bare hands, a young Torvani who was missing 2 of his 4 arms but still alive. The human gathered them all, protecting them, leading them through the nightmare. When they finally reached the secure bunker, 8 delegates had survived out of the original 30. Valari guards who had retreated there opened the massive doors, and the survivors stumbled inside. The blast doors sealed behind them with a boom that echoed through the reinforced chamber. And for a moment, everyone simply breathed. They were safe, at least for now. Celira looked at the human soldier, who had slumped against the wall near the door. He was still standing, still holding his knife, but his entire posture screamed exhaustion and pain. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice finally returning. "No common soldier fights like that. I have seen Valari masters who could not have done what you just did." The human's helmet turned toward her, but he said nothing. Instead, he simply slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his armored back leaving a smear of blood on the metal. Ambassador Chen limped over and knelt beside him. "Marcus," she said quietly, "let them help you." He shook his head. "Others first. The princess. The delegates. I can wait." Celira stared at him. He was bleeding, possibly dying, and his first concern was for others, including her, the woman who had insulted him and his entire species just hours ago. What kind of creature was this human? The armor falls. The bunker was cold and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that raged outside its reinforced walls. Celira sat on a metal bench, while a Valari medic treated a cut on her arm, a wound so minor she had not even noticed receiving it. Her eyes kept drifting to the human soldier, Marcus, who remained slumped against the wall near the door. A medic had approached him twice, and twice he had waved them away, pointing instead to other wounded delegates. "Stubborn creature," she muttered under her breath. Ambassador Chen sat nearby, her own wounds being tended by another medic. She caught Celira's gaze and offered a tired smile. "Your Highness," she said, "I believe I owe you my life, if Sergeant Major Cole had not found us when he did." "Sergeant Major?" Celira interrupted, her curiosity overcoming her pride. "I assumed he was a common soldier." Chen's smile faded into something more complex, sadness mixed with pride. "There is nothing common about Marcus Cole, Your Highness. He has served the Terran military for 14 years, and in that time he has become something of a legend among our people." Celira found this difficult to believe. The figure against the wall looked so ordinary, so unremarkable. His armor was scratched and dented, nothing like the gleaming ceremonial wear of Valari heroes. "A legend?" she asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Chen nodded slowly. He was at the siege of Proxima, where 200 humans held a mining station against 3,000 Kethvari for 47 days. Only 11 survived, and Marcus was among them. He lost his left arm in that battle. Celira's eyes widened. She knew of Proxima. The Valari had studied it as an example of human stubbornness, though they had never called it bravery. "He fought at the fall of Helion 4, Chen continued, where he led a retreat that saved over 10,000 civilians while the colony burned around them. And he survived the Kreth offensive, the only human to walk out of the death fields of Kreth alive. Each name was familiar. Each battle was a catastrophe that the Valari had assumed proved human weakness. They had lost so many in those conflicts, died in such terrible numbers. But this man had survived all of them? He has received the Terran Star of Valor 3 times, Chen said quietly. They stopped giving it to him after the 3rd, because it seemed excessive. There are those who believe he cannot die, that he has made some bargain with death itself. Before Celira could respond, the medic treating Marcus finally lost patience. The elderly Valari female marched over to the human and began speaking in rapid, stern tones that even Salira found intimidating. "You will let me treat you, human, or I will have the guards hold you down," the medic declared. "I have not spent 300 years learning the healing arts to watch patients bleed to death from stubbornness." Marcus looked up at her, and Salira could almost feel his exhaustion through the helmet. Finally, he nodded. The medic began removing his armor, and Salira found herself moving closer, drawn by a curiosity she could not explain. Other delegates gathered as well, watching as piece after piece of battered metal was stripped away. The chest plate came off first, revealing a torso wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. The medic cut these away with practiced efficiency, and Salira heard gasps from those around her. His body was a map of destruction. Scars covered nearly every inch of visible skin, plasma burns that had melted flesh and healed badly, blade wounds that had left ridges of white tissue, what looked like acid damage across his ribs that had eaten away at him like water eroding stone. The medic removed the armor from his left arm, and Selra's breath caught in her throat. From the elbow down, there was no flesh at all, only metal and carbon fiber, a crude prosthetic that whirred and clicked as he flexed his mechanical fingers. It was nothing like the elegant biotech replacements the Volari used, just raw function without any attempt at beauty. His right leg was the same below the knee, another mechanical replacement, scarred where it met his flesh, clearly installed in haste and never properly refined. But it was his back that made Selra's skin flicker through a dozen colors of shock and horror. A massive scar ran from his right shoulder down to his left hip, a jagged line of twisted tissue that could only have come from one thing. "A broodmother's tail blade," she whispered. "That wound should have killed him." The medic looked up from her work, her own bioluminescence pale with amazement. "The scar is at least 5 years old," she said. "He's been walking around with an injury that should have severed his spine." Finally, Marcus reached up and removed his helmet. His face was human, utterly, ordinarily human. He had brown eyes, one natural, and one a dull gray synthetic replacement. His hair was cut short, streaked with gray despite the fact that he could not have been more than 40 years old. His features were lined and worn, the face of a man who had seen too much and forgotten nothing. He looked at Salera, and she saw no anger in his eyes, no resentment for the mockery she had thrown at him earlier. There was only exhaustion, deep and profound, the weariness of someone who had been fighting for so long that he had forgotten what peace felt like. "Something wrong, Your Highness?" he asked. His voice was rough, without the helmet to smooth it, but not unkind. Salira opened her mouth to respond, to apologize perhaps, or to ask how any creature could endure what he had clearly endured, but no words came. For the first time in her life, the sharp-tongued princess of the Volari Dominion had nothing to say. The moment was broken by a crackle of static from the bunker's communication system. A voice, desperate, terrified, cut through the silence. "This is Commander Vethal of the Royal Guard. We have pushed back the initial assault, but the Kethvari have deployed reinforcements. They are bringing a hive captain. I repeat, they have a hive captain. We cannot hold them." The temperature in the bunker seemed to drop 10 degrees. A hive captain was not just a warrior. It was a battlefield commander, a creature bred for tactical brilliance and personal combat. They stood 8 feet tall, covered in armor like chitin that could stop plasma fire. And they had never been killed in single combat by any known species. The armor was damaged, sparking in places, but he secured it with practiced efficiency. Salira watched him prepare for what could only be his death, and something inside her shifted, something she had never felt before. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you die for people who mock you, who dismiss you, who think your species is beneath them?" Marcus paused, one hand on his helmet. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "And because maybe, if I do this, the next human who comes here will be treated differently." He put on his helmet and walked toward the bunker door, leaving Celira standing in silence, with the weight of his words pressing down on her heart. The bunker's tactical display flickered to life, casting harsh blue light across the faces of the survivors. A holographic image of General Vetheron, commander of the palace defenses, appeared above the console, his bioluminescent skin flashing with barely contained panic. "We are being overrun," the general reported. "The hive captain leads the second wave personally. My guards are falling back on all fronts. We have perhaps 20 minutes before they breach the secure wing." Marcus stood before the display, studying the layout of the palace with an intensity that made Celira uncomfortable. His damaged armor hummed and sparked, but he seemed not to notice. "Your defensive positions are wrong," he said suddenly. General Vetheron's skin flushed purple with indignation. "I beg your pardon, human?" "You are trying to hold the corridor intersections," Marcus continued, pointing at the holographic map. "It is the logical choice. Control the choke points, limit their advance. But the Kethvari know this. They will bleed you dry with wave assaults, while the hive captain finds another route." The general's expression shifted from insulted to uncertain. "What would you propose, then?" "Collapse the eastern wing. Use the emergency bulkheads to seal it off completely. That forces them to come through the northern approach, which is narrower. Then we rig the ceremonial gas lines as incendiary traps and turn the whole corridor into a kill box." Shocked silence followed this suggestion. Celira felt her skin flicker through shades of disbelief. He was suggesting they destroy 1,000 years of Valari architecture and history. "Absolutely not," General Vetheron declared. "The eastern wing contains artifacts dating back to the founding of the Dominion. You would have us burn our own heritage to ashes?" Marcus turned to face the hologram directly. "I would have you live. Artifacts can be rebuilt, General. Your people cannot." The general sputtered with outrage, but before he could respond, Celira stepped forward. "Do it," she said. Every eye in the bunker turned to her. The general's hologram flickered with shock. "Your Highness, you cannot be serious." "I am the voice of the Emperor in this place," Celira cut him off, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "I have the authority, and I am giving you a direct order. Collapse the eastern wing and implement the humans' plan." For a long moment, no one moved. Then General Vetheron bowed his head. "As you command, Your Highness, it will be done." The hologram vanished, and Celira felt the weight of what she had just ordered settle onto her shoulders. She had condemned irreplaceable pieces of her people's history to destruction on the word of a human she had mocked mere hours ago. Marcus turned to her, and though she could not see his face through his helmet, she felt his gaze. "That took courage," he said quietly. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," she replied. "Your plan had better work." They watched through the bunker's security feeds as the plan unfolded. The eastern wing collapsed in a cascade of crystal and metal, sealing off half the palace. The Kethvari swarm hesitated, then redirected toward the northern approach, exactly as Marcus had predicted. The killbox worked devastatingly well. Hundreds of Kethvari warriors flooded into the narrow corridor, and then the gas lines ignited. Celira watched as fire consumed the enemy in waves, their chitinous bodies burning like dry wood. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest. Perhaps they would survive this after all. Then the hive captain emerged from the flames. The creature was massive, easily 8 feet tall, and twice as broad as a normal Kethvari. Its chitin was black as void space, scarred and pitted from 100 battles. And its 4 blade arms gleamed with razor edges that had tasted the blood of countless species. It walked through the fire as if it were merely warm rain, its compound eyes fixed on the secure wing ahead. Behind it came more warriors, not as many as before, but enough. The survivors of the inferno, the strongest of the swarm, following their captain toward the final prize. "It is coming," Ambassador Chen whispered. Nothing can stop that thing. The Valari guards in the corridor fought bravely, their plasma rifles burning holes in the advancing swarm. But the hive captain moved through their fire like a force of nature. One guard fell, then another, then three more in rapid succession. Marcus watched the carnage on the security feed, then began checking his weapons. A plasma pistol with limited charge, his combat knife, a single grenade mag-locked to his belt. Celira grabbed his arm before she realized what she was doing. "You cannot be serious," she said. "That thing has killed Valari masters, Kroloth champions, warriors from a dozen species. You are wounded, your armor is failing, and you expect to face it alone?" He looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. "Do you have a better idea?" She did not. That was the terrible truth of it. "You will die," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus reached up and removed his helmet. His tired face held no fear, only a grim acceptance that made her hearts ache. "Humans do not survive because we are stronger, Your Highness," he said. "We survive because we do not know when to stop." He placed his helmet back on and walked toward the bunker door. The other survivors parted before him in silence. The Kroloth delegate bowing her massive head, Ambassador Chen wiping tears from her eyes, even the Valari guards saluting as he passed. The doors opened, and Marcus Cole walked out to face death. Celira rushed to the security console, calling up every camera in the corridor. She would not look away. She owed him that much. The hive captain had breached the final checkpoint. Bodies of Valari guards lay scattered around it like broken toys. It turned as Marcus approached, and Celira could swear she saw something like amusement in its alien eyes. "Human?" it spoke, its voice a clicking rasp that the translation software barely managed to interpret. "You come to die. How noble, how pointless." Marcus said nothing. He simply raised his plasma pistol and fired. The bolt splashed harmlessly against the hive captain's chest, leaving nothing but a scorch mark. The creature laughed, a horrible sound like grinding stone. "Pathetic," it declared, and charged. What followed was not a battle. It was a desperate, brutal struggle for survival. The hive captain was faster than anything that size should be, its blade arms a blur of black chitin. Marcus dodged, rolled, used every trick he knew, just to stay alive. He emptied his pistol into its joints, aiming for weak points. He threw debris in its eyes. He used fallen guards' weapons until they ran dry. And through it all, the hive captain kept coming, kept pressing, kept forcing him back. A blade arm caught his mechanical leg, tearing through metal and sending him crashing to the floor. He rolled away, just as another blade slammed down where his head had been. Celira watched, her hands pressed against the console screen, her skin cycling through every color of terror and desperate hope. "Get up," she whispered. "Get up, human." And somehow, impossibly, he did. Marcus Cole rose from the floor, sparks flying from his ruined prosthetic, and faced the nightmare once more. He pulled his last grenade from his belt, armed it, and charged directly at the hive captain. The creature caught him, blade arms piercing his armor, lifting him off the ground. But Marcus shoved the grenade into the joint where its head met its thorax, and smiled. The explosion threw them both backward. The hive captain staggered, ichor pouring from the wound in its neck. Marcus lay on the floor, not moving. But the hive captain was still alive, damaged, weakened, but alive. It turned toward the bunker doors, toward the survivors, and began to advance. Celira made her decision in a heartbeat. She grabbed a plasma rifle from a fallen guard's hands and ran for the door. The bunker doors slid open, and Celira stepped into the corridor with the plasma rifle raised. Her ceremonial gown was torn and splattered with blue Valari blood. Her elegant hair had come undone and hung in wild tangles around her face, and her hands trembled with fear. But she did not stop. The hive captain turned toward her. ichor still pouring from the wound Marcus had carved in its neck. Even injured, even weakened, it was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "Another fool," it rasped. "Another corpse for my collection." Celera did not respond with words. She aimed at the wound, the weak point Marcus had created with his sacrifice, and fired. The plasma bolt struck true, burning deeper into the already damaged chitin. The hive captain shrieked and staggered, its blade arms flailing. She fired again, and again, and again, pouring every ounce of charge the rifle held into that single weak point. The creature screamed, a sound that shook the walls and made her bones vibrate. Finally, with a last desperate shot, the hive captain fell. It crashed to the floor in a heap of smoking chitin and twitching limbs, and then it moved no more. Silence descended on the corridor, a silence so complete that Celera could hear her own hearts pounding in her chest. She dropped the rifle and ran to where Marcus lay. He was not moving, and for a terrible moment she was certain he was dead. But then he coughed, a weak, wet sound that was somehow the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. "Human," she called, dropping to her knees beside him. "Marcus, can you hear me?" His eyes opened, one brown, one gray, and focused on her face. "Your Highness," he whispered through cracked lips. "Did you get it?" "I got it," she confirmed, tears she did not understand streaming down her face. "You weakened it, and I finished it. We got it together." A ghost of a smile crossed his battered features. "Good," he breathed. "That is good." The other survivors emerged from the bunker then, rushing to help. Medics surrounded Marcus, working frantically to stabilize his failing body. Ambassador Chen knelt beside Celera, her own face wet with tears. "He is still alive," Chen said, as if she could not quite believe it. "Somehow, he is still alive." Evacuation ships arrived 10 minutes later. 10 minutes that felt like hours as Celera watched the medics fight to keep Marcus breathing. They carried him aboard on a stretcher, his body connected to machines that beeped and hummed with desperate urgency. Celera followed, ignoring the protocols that should have placed her on a separate ship. She would not leave his side, not after what he had done. The surgery took 12 hours. Valari physicians worked alongside human doctors, combining their knowledge to repair damage that should have been fatal. His mechanical arm was destroyed beyond repair. His remaining organic leg was shattered. His internal organs had taken damage that would have killed a Valari 3 times over. But humans, she learned, were stubborn creatures. They did not surrender to death easily. When Marcus finally woke, 3 days later, Celera was sitting beside his bed. She had barely left the medical bay since they had arrived at the Valari orbital station. His eyes opened slowly, and it took a moment for recognition to dawn. "Your Highness?" he croaked. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for you to wake up," she replied. "I have been told that humans find this comforting. Is that true?" He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "I suppose it is, thank you." She nodded, then fell silent. There was so much she wanted to say, so much she needed to express, but the words felt inadequate. "I never apologized," she finally said, "for what I said at the summit, for the way I mocked you and your people. It was cruel and wrong, and I am sorry." Marcus studied her face, and she saw something shift in his expression. A softening, perhaps, or simply surprise. "You saved my life," he said. "You killed the hive captain when I could not. I think that counts for more than words." "Words matter," she insisted. "They shape how we see each other, how we treat each other. I looked at you and saw something lesser, something to be dismissed. I was wrong." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, Your Highness." 6 months passed. The Galactic Coalition held together, strengthened by the shared trauma of the summit attack. Valari ships joined human vessels. Kroloth warriors fought beside Torvani soldiers, and together they pushed the Kethvari horde back to the Outer Rim. Princess Salira was instrumental in holding the alliance together. She spoke of unity, of the strength found in diversity, of the lessons learned in a burning palace. And when the time came for the Coalition's first anniversary celebration, she requested a special honor. The ceremony was held in the rebuilt eastern wing of the Valanthor Palace. Delegates from every species had gathered, and the atmosphere was one of cautious hope. Salira stood at the central podium, her skin glowing with carefully controlled patterns of gold and silver. "We have fought together," she began, her voice carrying across the great hall. "We have bled together. We have learned that our differences are not weaknesses, but strengths. But this lesson did not come easily." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd until it found a single figure standing near the back. A human man in dress uniform, his left arm a newly crafted prosthetic, his face still bearing the scars of battle. "I was taught this lesson by a human soldier," she continued, "a man I once mocked as primitive, as worthless. He stood against an enemy that should have destroyed him, not for glory, not for recognition, but simply because someone had to. He taught me that strength is not measured in elegance or history, but in the willingness to stand when standing costs everything." She gestured to an attendant, who unveiled a holographic display showing a new symbol, a simple emblem combining elements from all Coalition species. "Today I announce the creation of the Cole Distinction," Salira declared, "an honor awarded to any being, regardless of species, who demonstrates extraordinary valor in defense of others. It carries the name of the human who showed me what true courage looks like." Applause filled the hall, thunderous, genuine, united. Salira watched as Marcus Cole was surrounded by delegates offering congratulations, his uncomfortable expression almost making her laugh. Later, after the ceremony had ended and the crowds had thinned, she found him standing alone on a balcony overlooking the rebuilt gardens. "You look uncomfortable," she observed, joining him at the railing. He glanced at her with a wry smile. "I am a soldier, Your Highness. I prefer battlefields to ballrooms. And yet you came. Ambassador Chen threatened to have me court-martialed if I did not." Salira laughed, a genuine laugh, free of the carefully controlled dignity she usually maintained. "I am glad she did. This honor means nothing if its namesake is not present to see it." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "I still do not understand," Salira admitted, "why you fought so hard for people who treated you poorly. Why you were willing to die for an alliance that might never have accepted your people as equals." Marcus considered the question, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Because hope is a choice," he said finally. "I chose to believe that things could be better, that people could change. Sometimes that belief costs you everything. But sometimes," he turned to look at her, "sometimes it pays off." Salira felt something warm bloom in her chest, a feeling she had no Valari word for. She reached out and took his hand, a human gesture she had learned. "I am glad you survived, Marcus Cole," she said, "and I am glad your hope was rewarded." He squeezed her hand gently, his rough fingers intertwined with her elegant ones. "So am I, Your Highness. So am I." Above them, the stars shone down on a galaxy changed, not by weapons or warfare, but by a single stubborn human who refused to stop fighting. And somewhere in the darkness of space, the Kethvari learned a new word. They called it human, and they learned to fear it. For humans did not win because they were stronger or faster or more advanced. They won because they simply refused to lose, and that, the universe was learning, made all the difference.